A battlefield stretched beneath a bleak sky, littered with the bodies of more than a dozen fallen fighters. Dust and blood clung to the ground, marking the aftermath of a massacre that had ended long ago. Amid the silence, a lone survivor moved calmly through the field, stepping past the corpses without hesitation. Sama Jian walked forward with steady composure, leaving behind the remnants of 100 wandering souls. His grip tightened around his sword, the pressure in his hand revealing the emotions he refused to show on his face. At the edge of the battlefield stood the final surviving enemy, a man trembling as he struggled to breathe. Sama Jian approached him without urgency, forcing the man's attention onto him. He identified the man as Byung-gak, a name that immediately triggered panic. Byung-gak demanded to know how he was recognized, anger mixing with fear. Sama Jian only observed him quietly before implying that Byung-gak had forgotten him, suggesting that many prisoners had passed through Gumho Fortress over the years. As Sama Jian advanced, he admitted that the long-awaited moment carried a bitter weight. The tension in Byung-gak's mind sharpened into alarm as he realized the attacker had been there before, likely a former prisoner. Desperation rose within him as he searched for an escape. Before any plan could form, Sama Jian vanished from his original position and reappeared instantly in front of him. A single downward strike followed, too fast for any reaction. Byung-gak was struck down and collapsed under the force of the blow. Sama Jian sighed, disappointed that his opponent had attempted to escape during their exchange. He continued forward, stating that the conversation was not yet finished and that the man's punishment had only begun. He then referenced an event from 12 years earlier, prompting confusion and fear in Byung-gak. The mention triggered fragmented memories of the Yunsang escort agency. Recognition slowly surfaced in Byung-gak's mind as he recalled a group of escorts captured during an ambush at Gumho Fortress. Those memories revealed the truth. Sama Jian had been among those prisoners. The past resurfaced with brutal clarity. 12 years earlier, Sama Jian had been bound and dragged into the fortress by Byung-gak's men. He had been forced to witness torture inflicted on his companions. Among the atrocities, a burning iron rod had been pressed into his chest, leaving an unforgettable scar and pain that had nearly broken him. Back in the present, that buried trauma transformed into overwhelming killing intent. Sama Jian gathered his internal energy and struck with explosive force. Byung-gak was overwhelmed, unable to even speak as successive attacks crushed his defenses. With cold precision, Sama Jian severed Byung-gak's limbs, ensuring he could no longer move. The man collapsed in agony, his voice breaking into a desperate roar that echoed across the battlefield. Yet Sama Jian did not stop to savor the result. He pressed further, asking one final question about a name from the past, Sama Jian himself. Byung-gak responded in confusion, failing to understand the question at first. Sama Jian then clarified the truth of 12 years ago. During the ambush of the Yunsang escort mission, Byung-gak's group had sold him into slavery. The realization finally struck Byung-gak. He confirmed the memory with fractured regret, but there was no time for redemption. Sama Jian's sword came down again, and his killing intent surged to its peak. He declared that Byung-gak would carry that truth into the underworld, identifying himself as the escort guard who had been betrayed and sold. He channeled all his remaining power into a final release. The energy within Byung-gak's body ruptured violently, and his body disintegrated under the overwhelming force. Blood scattered across the ground as the last remnants of life faded. Sama Jian stood silently over the ruined corpse, his vengeance complete. After a moment, he sheathed his sword, though his expression remained heavy. The battlefield around him was silent and desolate, stained with the aftermath of retribution. He expressed a quiet resolve that this would be the final time his hands would be stained with blood, and that he would attempt to live a normal life from this point onward. As he prepared to leave, the ruins of a distant stone wall suddenly shattered. A subordinate emerged from the debris, rushing forward across the corpse-filled ground to report that all prisoners had been freed. Sama Jian acknowledged the report and praised the effort, while the subordinate observed the battlefield and commented on the completion of revenge. He questioned what would come next, referencing the enemies who had sold Sama Jian into slavery. The subordinate suggested that the remaining leader could still be hunted down later, and asked whether they would return home. Sama Jian looked up at the sky above the blood-soaked land. After a brief silence, he confirmed that they would finally return home. Under the distant stars that had silently witnessed the path of violence and retribution, the demonic path's first sword marked the end of his bloody journey. Time passed. A bright morning replaced the battlefield's darkness. Sama Jian walked leisurely along a quiet road, his subordinate following behind him. The calm atmosphere contrasted sharply with the violence of the past. Without turning back, Sama Jian questioned whether his companion was certain about continuing to follow him. The subordinate replied that he had nowhere else to go and expressed curiosity about Sama Jian's hometown. Their conversation shifted to the subordinate's past, revealing that he had once trained within the demonic cult and escaped from it. The memory carried both relief and disbelief, as if even he could not fully accept his own survival. Sama Jian reflected briefly on that sentiment, acknowledging that even he struggled to believe the path that had led him here. As he walked forward, his thoughts drifted back to the night he had returned to the headquarters of the demonic cult, his steps steady but his mind unsettled as the story continued toward an uncertain future. His serious expression took on an unusual severity the moment he stepped into the room. The person seated before him was Guan Hyo, the heaven-reaching demonic cult instructor, who regarded the young man with a sharp snort. That single sound made the atmosphere inside the room palpably tense. Sama Jian stepped forward and offered a formal greeting with clasped hands. Guan Hyo's sharp brows immediately tightened as he observed him in silence. Without speaking, he slowly poured tea into a cup, using internal energy to guide its movement with precise control. As he set the cup down, he remarked coldly that he had not expected Sama Jian to come. In response, the cup was sent forward with sudden force. Sama Jian calmly watched its trajectory and caught it without difficulty, then drank the contents without hesitation. After finishing, he quietly refilled Guan Hyo's cup. He then stated that when they first met the cult leader in Black Dragon Valley, a promise had been made granting freedom after 10 years of service to the Divine Demon Clan. Those 10 years had long since passed, and he had also fulfilled the additional condition given to him 3 years earlier. Guan Hyo leaned back, acknowledging the mention of a promise, but his thoughts turned uncertain as he set the cup down with controlled precision. He reflected that although the demonic factions had been unified and the heaven-reaching demonic cult had been restored, matters were still far from ideal, and he appeared inclined to reconsider the agreement. Sensing this shift, Sama Jian asserted that the original condition had not been simple unification, but the elimination of the 10 supremes of the demonic path who had once controlled the factions, all of whom had now been brought to their knees before the cult leader. Guan Hyo acknowledged this truth in silence, and poured himself another drink. As he drank, he recalled the years of training in Black Dragon Valley, remembering how among all the children raised there, Sama Jian had always stood out. Yet he had not been at this level in the past. In terms of raw martial skill, he had once been inferior even to Chiaowu. Everything had changed after his return from the destruction of the Ghost Gate sect. The murderous aura that once surrounded him had vanished completely, replaced by a fundamentally different presence, and his martial arts had advanced beyond imagination. Guan Hyo questioned inwardly what had truly happened to him during that time. At that moment, Sama Jian apologized. Guan Hyo abruptly slammed his empty cup onto the table and dismissed the apology as meaningless. He declared that Sama Jian had worked hard all these years, acknowledging that although his fate had been harsh, his contributions would not be forgotten, and he was permitted to leave. Having achieved what he came for, Sama Jian did not prolong the exchange. He expressed brief gratitude and turned to depart, offering a final remark of farewell. One of Guan Hyo's guards, angered by his demeanor, drew his sword and moved to strike, but Guan Hyo immediately restrained him with a calm command. Sama Jian remained still for a moment, as if assessing whether they would truly attack, before finally stepping out of the room. After he had left, Chiaowu appeared at the doorway and casually offered a light-hearted, irreverent farewell before departing as well. Sama Jian nervously recalled an unpleasant memory. He had completed missions that once seemed impossible and had finally gained his freedom, yet a lingering doubt remained within him. He wondered whether his family would even recognize the man he had become after spending more than a decade bathed in blood. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Chiaowu's loud voice. Chiaowu pointed ahead and spoke excitedly, asking if that was the guardian deity Sama Jian always mentioned, remarking on its enormous size. Sama Jian's gaze followed his gesture and landed on the massive tree. A rare emotion surfaced on his face as he looked at it. He identified it as the guardian spirit. His steps quickened as he moved toward it, his heartbeat growing louder in his chest. Memories resurfaced of how, every year, his parents and the village elders would come to offer their respects, while he and his siblings would climb the tree and play beneath it. As the familiar rustic scent of wood filled his senses, his voice trembled with emotion as he realized he had truly returned home. Sensing his reaction, Chiaowu spoke cheerfully, remarking that Sama Jian had once been like this, and that he had always imagined him as stone-faced even as a child. However, their moment was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. A child called out to them, causing both men to turn in confusion and realize that 3 children had appeared behind them without notice. One of the children informed them that outsiders were not allowed to touch the tree. Sama Jian quickly adopted a friendly tone and replied that he was not an outsider, asking if they were from Peach Blossom Village. The child hesitated and asked if he knew their village. Sama Jian smiled faintly while looking at the great tree trunk and confirmed that he did. He explained that this was the guardian spirit of Peach Blossom Village and that he had lived there as a child. The children stared at him in disbelief as he continued, describing the village layout in detail, including a small pond to the north and a thatched roof house slightly to its left, which he identified as his home. When he claimed it as his own, one child shouted in anger that he was lying. The accusation caused Sama Jian to freeze in place. He demanded to know what she meant. The girl insisted that the house belonged to someone named Adu, and claimed that Adu had no father or brother who looked like a mountain bandit. Chiao Wu, clearly displeased, questioned her remark about a bandit. Another child whispered uncertainly that he might be an uncle, but the girl rejected the idea and urged them to leave, insisting that Sama Jian was lying and calling him an ugly man before running off with the others. Chiao Wu became furious and roared at the children, causing them to flee in fear. Meanwhile, Sama Jian processed the unfamiliar name, Adu, in silence, realizing he had never heard it before. As they walked further into the village, Chiao Wu plucked a peach from a tree and tasted it, expressing satisfaction at its sweetness and remarking that it explained the village's name. He called out to Sama Jian, urging him to try one, but Sama Jian declined coldly. The two continued toward the northern side of the village. Soon, they arrived at a thatched roof house beside a small pond. The sight stirred deep emotion within Sama Jian as memories resurfaced. He murmured in quiet disbelief that the house remained exactly as he remembered, even in his dreams. Chiao Wu approached and asked if this was the place. Sama Jian confirmed it with quiet excitement. Just as he was about to step forward, a suspicious voice called out demanding to know who they were. Sama Jian turned and saw an elderly man watching them warily, surrounded by villagers armed with hoes, sickles, and clubs. It became clear that the children had reported them. The old man stepped forward and questioned their presence, stating that the house belonged to Adu and asking what business they had there. Sama Jian grew increasingly confused and denied the claim, insisting that it was the home of the Sama family, which had belonged to his ancestors for generations. The old man asked who he was. At that moment, Sama Jian paused and suddenly recognized him, asking if he was Mr. Zhang from the village chief's household. Zhang was shocked that the stranger knew his name and confirmed it cautiously, asking who he was. Sama Jian stepped forward, grabbed his hand, and his eyes brightened with emotion as he declared that he was Sama Jian, the boy who had once lived in that very house. Zhang was stunned at first, momentarily unable to place the name. Sama Jian, who was that? Then, an old image surfaced in his mind. Sama Jian, could it be that child from back then? Sama Jian could not hide his delight, and confirmed that it was indeed him. Zhang's shock deepened as he muttered in disbelief. To convince him further, Sama Jian gently pushed his hair back, revealing a faint scar on his forehead. He pointed it out, and asked if Zhang remembered it, the scar he had received when Wook struck him with a stone after losing a fight. At that moment, emotion overwhelmed the old man. He recognized it immediately, and confirmed it with a trembling voice. Tears streamed down Zhang's aged face as he rushed forward and embraced him tightly. He demanded to know where the boy had been all these years and why he had only returned now, asking what had happened to him. Sama Jian did not respond with words. He simply accepted the embrace in silence, his expression conveying that the story was too long to explain in a single moment. After the emotional reunion, both of them gradually composed themselves and moved inside the house. That night, inside the home, Zhang poured tea for his guest and spoke gently. He asked about what had happened 12 years ago, recalling how Sama Jian had insisted on joining the escort agency, and then disappeared. Sama Jian lowered his head, quietly blaming himself. He remembered how Zhang had tried repeatedly to stop him, warning him that working as a guard for the Silver Castle agency was dangerous. Zhang, now understanding that Sama Jian must have endured great hardship, spoke with sympathy. He recalled how the boy had been forced to take on the responsibility of the eldest son at a young age, making him stubborn and determined. He had once believed Sama Jian had died, and now asked how he had survived all those years. Sama Jian lowered his gaze, and memories of his past surfaced. For him, those years had been defined entirely by battle. Images of fierce duels flashed through his mind, the decisive confrontation with the first powerhouse of the demonic path, and the final stages of a battle against the heavenly sword demon. The sword demon had already been cornered, yet Sama Jian stood before him, seemingly uninjured. That sight had filled his opponent with both rage and excitement. The sword demon spoke bitterly of how it had been 300 years since the fall of the heavenly demon, and how the demonic path had been shattered. He mocked the so-called divine demon cult that claimed it would reunify the fractured demonic world, yet admitted that the rumors had proven true, that all of the 10 great demonic powers had been defeated by an ordinary-looking force, leaving only him. Sama Jian did not prolong the exchange and stated plainly that the sword demon was the last one. Once he was eliminated, he would finally be free. The sword demon's blood boiled at those words. With a fierce grin, he challenged Sama Jian to try, declaring that if he succeeded, he would become the strongest in the demonic cult, the first sword of the demonic path. Without delay, he unleashed a powerful strike to demonstrate his pride. However, the difference in strength was absolute. Sama Jian countered with a single swing of his sword, releasing a beautiful vortex of energy that sent the sword demon flying. The sword demon struggled to rise, but his strength had completely left him. He could only kneel, defeated. The outcome was undeniable. The pride and glory of his entire life came to an end in that moment. With a final breath, the sword demon admitted he had never expected such overwhelming power before collapsing lifelessly. He became nothing more than another forgotten name in the flow of history. Only then did Sama Jian exhale slowly in relief. Standing beneath the open sky, he looked toward the sun with a faint sense of hope and realized that it was finally over. Returning to the present, Jian found himself at a loss for words. He considered that even if he told the truth, it was unlikely to be believed. With that thought, he gave a vague explanation, stating that he had been sold to a mercenary group and had wandered for years before finally finding a way back. Zhang did not press for further details and instead offered quiet sympathy, acknowledging that he must have endured great hardship. Jian quickly shifted the topic and asked about his family's whereabouts. Zhang hesitated slightly before answering that Jian's siblings had moved to Sohung. Surprised, Jian repeated the name, and Zhang confirmed it, explaining gently that it had been 6 years since the move. After Jian's disappearance, they had tried to endure, but eventually had no choice but to relocate. The next morning, Jian set out once again. He and Qiuwu bid farewell to the village and departed quickly. However, the joy of returning home had already begun to fade, leaving behind a hollow ache within him. Zhang's words from the previous night continued to echo in his mind. His mother had passed away the year before. Jian climbed a quiet hill alone and sat on a large rock. Overwhelmed by emotion, he broke down in tears. He mourned his mother, missed his younger siblings, and blamed himself for everything he believed he had failed to protect. Trembling under the weight of his grief, he questioned how such an unfilial son could ever ask for forgiveness. After some time, he forced himself to regain composure. Later, upon reaching Sohung, he discovered a dilapidated old house. The sight only deepened his sorrow. Qiuwu attempted to lighten the mood by teasing him, questioning whether he was afraid, and remarking that it was unusual to see him like this after having once walked calmly through enemy territory. Jian dismissed the comparison, stating that this situation was different. Qiuwu shrugged and urged him to simply go inside, insisting there was nothing to fear. Jian hesitated, admitting that it was not so simple. He felt he did not have the right to face them after all this time, especially considering how much they must have suffered while living in such conditions. Qiuwu dismissed his concerns, suggesting they could simply buy a new house and encouraging him to act now that he had returned. After a moment of silence, Jian accepted the encouragement. He resolved inwardly that he would never leave his family again. With renewed determination, he stepped forward and raised his hand to knock. He called out, asking if anyone was home, but his movement stopped abruptly. Standing before him was a girl. At the sight of her face, Jian froze in shock. Though she had grown into a young woman, her features still faintly resembled the little girl he once carried on his back. His expression tightened with disbelief as he stepped forward, trying to confirm what he was seeing. He began to ask if she was, but Qiuwu interrupted him suddenly, exclaiming in admiration that she was absolutely gorgeous. Startled, Jian immediately struck Qiuwu as a warning. He then composed himself, softened his tone, and asked the girl if she was Sama Jin. Sama Jin's eyes widened in shock as she asked how he knew her name. Upon hearing her confirmation, Jian was overwhelmed with joy and firmly grasped her hand. He began to speak, saying that she had grown so much and that he was. However, his words suddenly trailed off. Something about Jin's hand felt deeply wrong. Jian stared at her with growing suspicion, and as he continued to examine her condition, his expression shifted to alarm. He sensed an abnormal surge of energy within her body and asked in shock what was going on. Sama Jin panicked and tried to pull her hand away, but her strength slipped out of control. She lost her balance and fell to the ground. Jian immediately reacted in concern, calling out to her in alarm. For the usually composed Jian, the situation left him uncertain and shaken. At that moment, a loud shout rang out from nearby. A young boy charged forward, demanding who they were. Jian and Qiuwu turned toward the voice in unison. Sama Jin, as if seeing salvation, called out desperately, addressing him as her little brother. Still confused, Jian repeated the words. "Little brother?" Before noticing the boy had already launched himself forward. The boy shouted that Jian had dared to touch his sister and threw a powerful punch. Jian easily evaded it with a slight movement and calmly asked if the boy was Ho. The boy roared in anger, confirming it and introducing himself as Guangho of the Concordant Mind Association. Without hesitation, he continued his assault, unleashing a chaotic barrage of punches and kicks while shouting accusations that they were despicable members of the Blood Axe sect. As he dodged effortlessly, Jian thought to himself about the names being thrown around. Concordant Mind Association, Blood Axe sect. He wondered if the boy had become involved with some kind of gang. He observed both Jin and the hot-headed youth and reflected that they once seemed innocent and mischievous, yet had now grown into entirely different people. Realizing none of his attacks were landing and that he was being treated lightly, Guangho became enraged. He shouted that Jian had not only humiliated his sister but was now mocking him as well, declaring that he would take his life. Fortunately, another young man arrived and intervened, stopping Guangho. He sternly reprimanded him, telling him to stop and questioning what he was doing on their mother's death anniversary. Jian observed the scene with a grave expression. Hearing those words, he wondered if the newcomer might be Haiyan. Guangho, still agitated, ignored the warning and told him to move aside. Haiyan, displeased, questioned his actions and reminded him that they did not yet understand the situation. He accused him of acting recklessly and asked if associating with those so-called gangsters had made him lose his judgment. Seeing that both of them were safe and well, Jian could not suppress a faint sense of relief and happiness. He thought to himself that they had all grown up. Guangho stubbornly insisted once again that they were not ruffians. Haiyan, clearly disappointed, warned him not to associate with them in the first place, as if trying to shape something refined out of rough material. To Jian, however, the chaotic scene felt strangely peaceful. He thought that as long as they were safe, nothing else mattered. At that moment, Guangho noticed Jian lowering his guard and seized the opportunity to strike. However, his blade was instantly stopped by Qiuwu's bare hand. With overwhelming strength, Qiuwu crushed it effortlessly as though it were made of soft clay. Guangho's face turned pale as he called him a monster. Qiuwu's competitive spirit flared, and he proudly declared himself the great Jumgang Yacha. Guangho, still furious, shouted that he did not care who they were and accused them of trying to steal from his family, calling them shameless intruders. This time, Qiuwu was truly provoked. He demanded to know what Guangho meant, angrily rejecting the accusation and asking if he looked like a thief. Jian calmly stopped Qiuwu from escalating the fight. He then approached the three siblings and hesitantly tried to introduce himself, but before he could finish, Guangho shouted in alarm, identifying the approaching group as the Blood Axe sect. Jian turned his gaze toward the disturbance with mild irritation. A group of menacing men was swaggering toward them. The leader glanced at his subordinate and asked who the unfamiliar figures were, then, without waiting for an answer, raised his chin and spoke in a condescending tone, demanding who they were and what they were doing there. Without hesitation, the leader stepped forward, grabbed Jian by the collar, and roared for him to answer properly. Another Blood Axe member approached Qiuwu, sizing him up with disdain and asking what such a massive man was doing there. Guangho, witnessing this, burned with rage. He pointed at them and shouted that this was Concordant Mind Association territory and demanded to know why the Blood Axe sect had come. Jian narrowed his eyes as he observed them. So it really is the Blood Axe sect, he thought. At that moment, the group leader smirked and declared arrogantly that they were taking over the area, then specifically addressed Guangho by name. Hearing this, Guangho's expression darkened. Grinding his teeth, He muttered that one troublemaker had not been enough and now they were seeking an all-out fight. He released Jian's shoulder, stepped forward without hesitation, and prepared to confront them directly. The leader walked forward with an arrogant swagger, saying that everything would end peacefully if they cooperated. In that instant, Jian's sword was drawn from its sheath. With a single fluid motion, he struck. The attack was instantaneous and precise, and the Blood Axe leader collapsed, killed in a single blow. For a brief moment, chaos spread among the Blood Axe members. They looked around in shock and suspicion, one of them exclaiming in disbelief, demanding who had done it and how it was possible. Jian used sound transmission to speak to Chiao Wu, instructing him to handle the rest. He signaled him calmly, telling him to eliminate the remaining enemies. Chiao Wu raised an eyebrow, his expression confident and unbothered. He replied that it would be taken care of. Without hesitation, the remaining Blood Axe sect members charged forward with their blades aimed at him. Chiao Wu moved to meet them head-on. With a faint, confident expression, he advanced and unleashed his fists, quickly overwhelming and striking down the attackers one after another. When it was over, Chiao Wu looked at the fallen bodies and sneered in contempt, calling them useless small fry. Then, scratching his head awkwardly, he muttered that he might have been a bit too rough. The three siblings, Jin, Guangho, and Haiyan, stood frozen in place, mouths agape in shock. They struggled to comprehend what had just happened, realizing that an entire group had been wiped out in an instant. Chiao Wu pointed at the defeated enemies at his feet and smirked, asking if they still thought he was on their side. Jian looked flustered, unsure how to respond. He then stepped forward again, trying to calm them. He insisted that they were not thieves and addressed Jin, Guangho, and Haiyan directly, asking if they did not recognize him. As he spoke, he pulled his hair back to reveal the scar once more. Guangho gasped in shock. Staring at it, he asked in disbelief if it was truly him, his older brother. Jian smiled softly and confirmed that he had returned. Haiyan immediately rushed forward and embraced him tightly, burying his face against his shoulder as he broke down in tears. Jian held him and spoke gently, apologizing for being late and asking if he had kept them waiting too long. Guangho was stunned, his eyes widening in disbelief as he asked what had happened and where Jian had been all this time. Jian let out a quiet sigh and replied that he would explain everything later, as it was a long story. From inside the house, smoke rose from the kitchen chimney while Chiao Wu's hearty voice echoed nearby. He spoke cheerfully, saying he liked Guangho's personality and that there were a few people like him among their subordinates, referring to Jian as boss. Guangho frowned and narrowed his eyes in curiosity, asking why Chiao Wu kept calling Jian boss. Chiao Wu crossed his arms and explained that when he was younger, he had once picked fights with Jian and been beaten badly, and that Jian had even saved his life a couple of times afterward. Guangho reacted with excitement, asking if that was really true. Jian immediately used sound transmission to warn Chiao Wu not to speak nonsense. Chiao Wu forced a smile and corrected himself, saying he was only joking and that Jian simply disliked being called brother. Jian then calmly stated the same, deflecting the topic, and asked how they had been living all these years. Haiyan calmly replied while eating that he was working as an escort at the Pearl Sea Escort Agency. Jian's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he repeated the words, asking if it was an escort agency. Haiyan added that Jian must not have heard about it from Mr. Zhang, and explained that he was currently learning the trade under the general manager with Yuck. Jian frowned and muttered that he had expected their mother would have been against such work. Haiyan nodded and confirmed that she had been even more strongly opposed than expected. Guangho, sitting nearby and chewing his food, remarked bluntly that Jian had disappeared while working as an escort and that he had been wrong to choose that path from the beginning. Haiyan immediately snapped back, his face turning red with anger, calling Guangho a wandering bum and questioning his right to speak. Guangho remained unfazed and replied that at least he earned more than Haiyan. Haiyan's expression darkened further, as he accused Guangho of making money by bullying the weak and said he did not need such money. Unable to hold back his anger any longer, Guangho shouted that they never bullied anyone and that Haiyan was speaking without understanding. At that moment, Samajin slammed a plate onto the table and shouted for them to stop, saying that Jian had only just returned after 12 years and that they were still arguing. Her expression suddenly changed, and she abruptly suffered a nosebleed. Panicked, Samajin tried to pinch her nose shut while trembling. Everyone froze in shock. Jian rushed over immediately, his expression tightening as he examined her condition. He realized something critical, that the yin energy in her body was far too strong. Guangho stood up in alarm and asked how Jian knew that. Jian turned and asked whether they had taken her to a clinic for examination and what the doctors had said. Hyan explained that they had visited the most renowned clinics in the region, but none had been able to determine the cause. Even the most reliable physician had given the same assessment Jian had just made, which was why her hands and feet were constantly cold and her skin remained pale. Jean calmly reassured them, saying that she was fine and that she could still endure it. Without saying anything further, she quietly opened the door and stepped outside, leaving the others in stunned silence. After the door closed, Hyan lowered his head and explained that they had moved to Sohung because the doctor who might be able to help her was there. Guangho added, his voice trembling with emotion, that she could only function normally by taking medicine that supplemented her young energy, otherwise Jean might not have survived until now. A heavy silence followed. Jian remained quiet for a moment, then asked whether there was a cure. Hyan's expression darkened as sadness crept into his face. He explained that a complete cure was difficult, but the symptoms could be managed with treatment. However, the cost was extremely high, and even maintaining the treatment was already a heavy burden. The money he earned was not enough, and without the extra income brought in by his younger brother, they would not have been able to endure. In truth, he added, he did not even have the right to criticize him. Hyan raised a hand to hide the tears forming in his eyes. Guangho was taken aback. Jian placed a hand on Hyan's shoulder in quiet comfort. He told him that he had done nothing wrong, and that no brother could stand by while his sibling went astray. He then admitted that the one who had no right to speak was himself, and he apologized to both of them. In unison, Guangho and Hyan immediately responded, calling him Big Brother. Jian's gaze remained steady and firm. He thanked them and said that they should not worry about money. The next day, they would go and meet that doctor. Hyan stood up and bowed deeply, thanking him and urging him to rest, saying he must be exhausted. Guangho also stood, and together the two of them left. A heavy silence remained between Jian and Qiuwu. Jian poured himself a cup of wine. Beside him, Qiuwu muttered that if he had known, he would have brought some things with him. Jian, not fully hearing him, turned and asked what he meant by brought, questioning if he was referring to bandits. Qiuwu raised his cup thoughtfully, and replied that those bandits had accumulated a large amount of wealth, but Jian had ordered it to be left untouched. Jian took a slow sip of wine and stated that the wealth belonged to the victims, the captured merchants and escorts, and should be returned to their families. He added that he had no desire to touch such money. Qiuwu fell silent, unsure how to respond, and only said that it was Jian's decision. He then mentioned that they still possessed the item obtained from the demonic Buddha temple, which could be sold for a good price. He asked for Jian's opinion on Jin's condition. Jian set his cup down and admitted that he was uncertain, as he was not a physician. Qiuwu asked if he could not make even a rough guess. After a moment of thought, Jian explained that the balance of energy in Jin's body was severely distorted, with yin energy overwhelmingly dominant. Qiuwu frowned and suggested that they could simply supplement her yang energy, adding that with Jian's internal strength, it should not be difficult. Jian shook his head slowly, stating that the situation was not that simple. He had already attempted to transfer yang energy as suggested, but it had no effect, as there was no viable path for energy to enter her body. Alarmed, Qiuwu asked what that meant. Jian's expression grew grave as he concluded that if the condition continued, Jin might not survive. The following day, all of them arrived in front of a renowned clinic. They looked up at the scene together. The place was packed with people, and the noise of families and patients filled the air as attendants called out for order. Jian remarked that the line was extremely long, and that they had arrived late, though they had left early. He had not expected such overwhelming crowds, confirming that it was indeed a famous clinic. Guangho casually smiled and explained that this was the most well-known clinic in the region. He then stepped forward confidently. He approached the group managing the queue and politely greeted them, clasping his hands and thanking them for their hard work. Seeing this, Qiuwu asked who they were. Hyan replied that they were members of the Concordant Mind Association, explaining that they did not only manage this place but also earned money by maintaining order at other business locations as well. Qiuwu scoffed slightly, remarking that they were essentially security guards. He then questioned why Guangho was acting so submissive, especially after his earlier boastful attitude. Qiuwu spoke dismissively, asking what pillar they were referring to and remarking that Guangho was nothing more than an errand boy. He then laughed heartily, adding that everyone had to start somewhere. After completing his negotiations, Guangho quickly returned and called the group over, announcing that arrangements were finished and they could proceed inside. Chiu-Wu smiled with satisfaction and leaned toward Jian, quietly commenting that Guangho was more capable than he appeared. The group moved further into the clinic. The deeper they went, the more crowded it became. Jian observed aloud that not only were there many patients, but there were also a large number of physicians. Hyan, walking beside him, explained that in his experience as an escort, he had never seen a place as large as this, not even in Sohung or surrounding regions. When he first arrived, there had only been one guard and one physician, a man named Sosoma, but due to his abilities, the clinic had expanded rapidly within just a few years. Jian quietly repeated the name. Sosoma. Chiu-Wu confidently added that the physician was certainly not a fraud. Although Jian acknowledged this, he could not suppress his lingering concern. He wondered why such a skilled physician had been unable to diagnose Sama Jin's illness. At that moment, Guangho entered ahead of them and greeted the staff enthusiastically. The physician responded, noting that it was not yet time for a follow-up visit and asking why they had come. Guangho directly stated that they had a matter to discuss and requested an audience. The physician nodded and instructed them to wait inside while he summoned his master. Inside, injured patients were visible throughout the area. As Jean settled into a room, a voice came from outside announcing the physician's arrival. Shortly after, the physician entered with an apologetic expression, saying he had been surprised to learn of their visit. He added that the previous medicine was still effective and had worried her condition might have worsened. After examining Jin's face closely, he concluded with relief that it did not appear to be the case. Guangho quickly clarified that they were not there for a routine visit. He explained that Jian had insisted on meeting the physician, which was why they had come in haste. Jian stepped forward respectfully, clasping his hands and introducing himself as Sama Jian. The physician returned the greeting and introduced himself as Huang Zhong. He added that although he had been treating the patient's family for years, he had only just learned that she had an older brother. Observing him, Jian silently assessed that the physician gave a good impression and appeared genuinely humble. He also noted with mild surprise that the man seemed to be a physician who also practiced martial arts. Chiu-Wu appeared to share the same impression, remarking that the physician was quite impressive. Through sound transmission, Jian quietly confirmed to Chiu-Wu that the man possessed real ability. Jian explained to the physician that he had been away for a long time and had only recently learned of Jin's serious illness. Upon hearing that the physician was directly treating his younger sister, he had come immediately to seek him out. Physician Huang Zhong responded politely, stating that while it was not a complete cure, they were welcome to seek help. He then checked Jin's pulse and conducted a thorough re-examination. The room fell into complete silence as everyone watched intently. After a moment, the physician spoke with a sorrowful expression, admitting that Jin's condition had always troubled him and that he regretted his limitations as a healer. Hyan quickly tried to comfort him, saying he should not blame himself, and that Jin was still alive thanks to his care. Without him, she might not have survived until now. The physician thanked him for his understanding but explained that he could only slow the progression of the illness and prevent the worst outcome. Jian fell into deep thought, repeating the phrase silently in his mind, the worst outcome being Jin's life itself. He then asked whether stronger medicine would improve her condition. The physician explained that the current treatment did have some effect, and that stronger medicine would likely yield better results. He elaborated that they were currently using herbs that strengthened yang energy to counteract Jin's overwhelming yin energy, with fire spirit herb as the main ingredient. A stronger variant could increase effectiveness. However, he added with resignation that the most powerful form, the 1000-year fire spirit herb, was extremely rare and nearly impossible to obtain. He also mentioned Gongqing petroleum as another possibility. Jian asked whether such medicine was available in the clinic. The physician waved his hand and stated that such spiritual medicines were not stocked there and were dangerous to handle. Both Jian and Chiu-Wu silently came to the same conclusion, that such rare spiritual medicines were sought after even by martial artists. After a moment of silence, Jian asked where he could find them. The physician did not answer directly. Instead, he asked whether they had ever heard of the Suryong merchant group. Hyan, standing beside them, responded that he had some knowledge of it and asked if he meant the merchant group based in Hangzhou. The physician confirmed it, explaining that it was one of the largest merchant groups in the Central Plains. He then stated that not long ago, the chairman's son had fallen seriously ill with malaria, prompting an urgent request for him to treat the boy. During that time, the chairman had mentioned possessing a medicine capable of curing the illness, and upon seeing it, the physician had been greatly surprised. Jian frowned and asked whether the medicine had been used. The physician immediately denied it, stating that if Gongqing petroleum had been used to treat malaria, he would have been ridiculed as a physician throughout the world. When he refused its use, the guild master had even responded half-jokingly. Jian fell silent for a moment, and then asked how much it cost. With a somewhat self-deprecating tone, the physician stated that it was priced at 300 taels of gold, as the chairman intended to sell it for that amount. Upon hearing this, Guangho and Haiyan were left speechless in shock. Sama Jin let out a disappointed sigh. Haiyan, still stunned, remarked that a single tael of gold was already enough to cover half a year's worth of medical expenses for them. Chiou-Wu muttered that the seller probably did not offer credit. Jian immediately confirmed that such a thing would not be possible. Chiou-Wu then frowned and suggested that their current resources were insignificant, but if they sold that item, it might be enough. Curious, Guangho and Haiyan asked what he meant. Jian used sound transmission to warn Chiou-Wu not to bring up the demonic Buddha matter again. Chiou-Wu quickly clarified that he had obtained an item during a mercenary assignment at Mount Mandiak, initially thinking it was just a glowing stone, but later learning it was extremely valuable and could be sold for a high price. Jian added that when the appraiser evaluated it, its value had nearly reached 400 taels, shocking them at the time. Once again, Guangho and Haiyan gasped in disbelief. Sama Jin, as if seeing a glimmer of hope, called out tearfully to Jian. Jian gently placed a hand on her shoulder and reassured her that he would find a way to save her. He then turned back to the physician and declared that he would purchase the Gongqing petroleum and asked him to arrange a meeting. The physician readily agreed and promised to contact the merchant group immediately. Sometime later, the scene shifted to Hangzhou. Under clear skies, a vast and magnificent mansion stood before them, its interior even more splendid than its exterior. Inside, the chairman of the Suryong merchant group spoke coldly, declaring that he would not sell. Jian, taken aback, asked him to repeat what he had just said. The chairman reiterated firmly that he was not selling the azure pure stone oil. With a confident expression, he added whether they understood his position. Jian remained silent for a long moment before asking the reason. The chairman looked down at the emerald-colored object before him, his expression darkening with displeasure, and stated that it was not enough. Jian's eyebrows lifted slightly as anger quietly rose within him. He forced himself to stay calm and responded firmly, suggesting that if the chairman believed it was a fake, he could have it reappraised by someone more capable. The chairman dismissed that immediately. That was not the issue. As the head of the Suryong merchant group, he claimed to have a discerning eye. Lowering his voice, he confirmed that the item was indeed a night globe pearl, and a high-grade one at that. Jian grew even more confused and asked why, in that case, the deal was being refused. The chairman looked at Jian with a resentful expression. Though visibly irritated, he suddenly burst into loud laughter, seemingly to ease the tension. He explained that the physician had likely mentioned his earlier remark about selling it for 300 taels, but that had been nothing more than a joke. In truth, they had no intention of selling it at all. His expression then turned serious again as he asked whether Jian understood why the item had been taken out in the first place. Jian answered directly, stating that it had been due to the chairman's son contracting malaria and its intended use as treatment. The chairman confirmed this without hesitation, adding that his son had contracted the chronic form of malaria, the most severe and difficult type to treat. That was precisely why he had brought out the medicine. He further explained that azure pure stone oil was regarded as a spiritual medicine capable of bringing the dead back to life, and that finding it was as difficult as plucking stars from the sky. Chiou-Wu, who had been listening silently, became visibly tense upon hearing this. The chairman continued without concern, explaining his reasoning for refusing the sale. If news of its existence spread, their residence would immediately become a target for countless opportunists and greedy factions. For that reason, it had been kept hidden, reserved only for emergencies involving important members of the merchant guild. He added that the physician had been trusted with the secret and had promised not to disclose it, as he was not someone who broke his word easily. He then added another point with sharp judgment, noting that the physician must have only revealed it while desperately searching for a cure for a critically ill patient. And given the circumstances, that patient could only be someone extremely important. He paused briefly, and Jian understood the implication without needing it spoken aloud. The chairman straightened his posture and continued in a serious tone, stating that once a secret was exposed, others would inevitably come investigating. Therefore, it had to be dealt with immediately. Moreover, such a precious spiritual medicine could not be easily handed over, and in a situation of high demand, it was only natural for the seller to raise the price. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his lips as he mentioned the profit to be made. He then declared that the price would be set at 500 taels. Chiyo-woo was stunned by the price and blurted out in shock, unable to contain himself. The chairman calmly picked up the night globe pearl again and continued assessing it as though nothing had happened. He resumed the negotiation, stating that, as he had said before, the pearl was of high quality, but its small size meant it was not worth 400 taels of gold. It needed the right buyer to realize its true value. At most, he would only offer 300 taels. He then placed the pearl back down and began calculating additional charges with ease. He added that there would be a 100 tael confidentiality fee for the transaction and another 100 taels due to high demand. In total, an additional 200 taels would be required. In exchange, he would provide the azure pure stone oil. The chairman's blatant greed enraged Chiyo-woo, who shouted curses in frustration, calling him insane and pointing directly at him. He threatened that there were limits to everything and even warned that he might destroy the entire merchant group. Jian immediately stopped him and scolded him for always acting impulsively and causing trouble. He then turned to the matter at hand and asked how much money they currently had. Chiyo-woo answered honestly that they had brought about 120 taels when they left, with some additional funds beyond that. Before he could finish, Jian turned back to the chairman and continued the negotiation himself, stating that he would add another 100 taels and retain only a small amount for living expenses. Chiyo-woo was shocked even further by this decision. Jian ignored his reaction and instead focused his attention on the chairman. He asked directly, with a sharp tone, whether the chairman truly had a good eye, and then questioned what he thought of him. Faced with this unexpected challenge, the chairman paused to assess him carefully. After a moment, he stated that although Jian was young, he carried the aura of someone who had experienced life and death repeatedly. Jian did not hesitate and openly admitted that he had once been forced into the demonic path. Countless lives had been taken by his hand, and it had not been easy to escape that life. He explained that he had made a promise to himself to end his blood-soaked past and live a normal life with his family. He continued speaking about his past as the chairman listened in silence. Jian added that his family was now in difficult circumstances, and he no longer had reason to keep that promise. He then asked directly what the chairman thought he would do under such conditions. The chairman narrowed his eyes, carefully analyzing every detail and possibility in his mind. He concluded that Jian was not lying, as he was openly revealing his darkest past along with his remaining wealth. After a moment of thought, the chairman chose not to answer directly. Instead, he offered a condition. He agreed to make an exception for Jian's situation, but in return, Jian would have to assist him with something in the future. Jian's objective appeared to be achieved, and he immediately accepted the condition. In the end, both parties reached an agreement. The azure pure stone oil was secured, and lodging for the night had also been arranged. A campfire burned steadily as grilled fish finished cooking nearby. Chiyo-woo ate while using his dagger, but the events from that morning still lingered in his mind, making him angry. He muttered that the man was a bastard and added that if it weren't for Jian, he would have flattened him without hesitation. Jian also felt a hint of guilt and apologized for the situation regarding their shared funds before taking a sip of tea. Chiyo-woo responded that it did not matter, since they were talking about saving Jin's life. He said he did not care whose money it was, but what angered him was that the chairman had known their situation and still deliberately raised the price. Frustrated, he muttered that he could not stand it, and even questioned whether they should go back and take it by force. Jian immediately suppressed his rising anger and warned him sharply, asking if he intended to spill blood over medicine meant to save his sister. Chiyo-woo, after a pause, muttered that when it was put that way, Jian was right. Jian picked up a branch from nearby and spoke about his thoughts. He reflected that everything they had done had been for survival after being kidnapped, and although their victims had all belonged to the demonic path, they were still stained with blood. He acknowledged that his own hands were covered with the lives of countless people, including the 10 great powers, all for the sake of unifying the demonic path. He then stated that now that they had escaped that world and entered society, they needed to abandon their old ways. Emphasizing each word, Jian explained that the Central Plains was governed by the order of the Murim world and its great clans, and they would have to adapt to it. He added that when he had given the extra 100 taels, it had been with the intention of leaving some funds for living expenses, and he believed that decision was the right one. He then said that after saving Jin, they would still need to find a way to live. Though it was late, he wanted to take responsibility as the head of the family and live a normal life together, hoping it could also serve as a form of atonement for his late mother. Finally, he added that he would not force Chiyowu to stay, and that he was free to leave whenever he wished. Chiyowu, who had been drinking, suddenly stopped. His eyes widened in shock, and he flailed his hands anxiously as he quickly insisted that he was sorry for being hot-headed. He said they had sacrificed too much to escape their past, and when he thought about their squadmates, he could not abandon them. He added that the current situation reminded him of the old days. Jian, who was eating fish at the time, paused and asked what he meant. Chiyowu fell silent, feeling guilty, and vaguely referred to the past, mentioning the time Jian had obtained Gongqing petroleum from the Guimum clan and given it to him. He admitted that if he had saved some instead of drinking it all, they would not be in this situation. Seeing his regretful expression, Jian could not bring himself to scold him. He simply told him to save it, adding that there had not been much to begin with and that for someone of Chiyowu's size, it had barely been enough anyway. Chiyowu chuckled and admitted he had a point, but added that thanks to it, he had perfected his diamond body technique. He then turned his head slightly and glanced into the darkness behind them, saying that he could smell the blood of those people. Suddenly, a strange sound came from a distance. Chiyowu narrowed his eyes and wondered who it could be. Jian also became alert, his expression sharpening as he gathered his belongings. He said he did not know, but had a bad feeling, and that they would have to see for themselves. The sound of approaching horse hooves grew louder and clearer. Soon, a group of bandits surrounded them completely. Once Jian and Chiyowu were encircled, the riders halted and dismounted one by one, each carrying dangerous weapons and locking onto their targets with hostile intent. Jian glanced at them and remarked calmly that they were not very friendly. One bandit drew his sword and said that the fugitives were surprisingly fast. Another added that they had almost lost them. A third, already with his blade drawn, gave a blunt order to cut their legs first to ensure they could not escape. Jian's tone turned serious as he asked whether they were being followed. The bandits ignored his question and demanded that they hand over their goods if they valued their lives, promising a painless death in return. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. Jian scanned the surroundings, searching for an escape route, while one of the men rode forward with arrogant composure. He warned that otherwise they would suffer endlessly, unable to live, yet not allowed to die. Chiyowu frowned and asked what goods they were referring to. The man pointed directly at their belongings and stated that he meant the item obtained from the Suryong merchant group. Jian's chest burned with anger. The chairman had promised secrecy, yet their location had been exposed regardless. Forcing himself to remain calm, Jian spoke coldly, telling them all to get lost. He said he had seen enough blood in his life and ordered them to leave if they valued their lives. A thug sneered, accusing them of pretending ignorance. He stated that after confirming they had taken the azure pure stone oil, they had tracked them all the way there. The others joined in with mocking laughter, saying they would have already handed it over if it were them. They added that their boss was simply worried the old man might consume it himself, and that if they waited longer, they would just raid the place anyway. They told them it would be better to die peacefully, hand it over, and go meet their ancestors. One of them glanced at Chiyowu and insulted him, asking what that giant bastard was supposed to be, calling him disgusting. Chiyowu did not take offense. Instead, he showed interest. He asked calmly what they meant by giant, and who they were. The thugs laughed mockingly, asking if introductions were really necessary. Another said it would not matter since they were about to die anyway, and that answering a few questions before reincarnation was simply the behavior of a true hero. Jian and Chiyowu exchanged a brief look, silently communicating. One of the thugs proudly declared that they were the Thousand Killers Gang, rulers of the night in Hangzhou, calling themselves heroes of their organization. At that moment, their leader suddenly shouted for everyone to be quiet. He rode forward and glared at them, declaring that he would count to 3 and demanded their decision, 1 for a peaceful death, 2 for a life worse than death. Chiyowu's expression twisted in disgust as he muttered that perhaps he should send them off first instead. The leader's face contorted in rage, veins bulging as he shouted whether they were daring to mock him. He immediately ordered his subordinates to act. They responded in unison. With a cold smile, he commanded them to show the enemies the taste of hell. The entire group raised their weapons toward Jian and Chiyowu. Chiyowu remained calm and turned slightly, asking if it was really necessary to risk their lives over a promise. Jian's eyes hardened with killing intent as he replied that there was no other choice, adding that he had already warned them. Chiyo Wu prepared for the fight while commenting on the smell of blood and the killing intent around them, noting that the opponents had taken quite a few lives. The leader, enraged, ordered his men to tear out the insolent brute's tongues. In response, 3 of the goons drew their swords and charged at Chiyo Wu with full force. Chiyo Wu faced them with a mocking smile, challenging them to come at him. However, before the fight could fully begin, Jian called for everyone to stop for a moment. Chiyo Wu turned to question him, and Jian pointed in a certain direction. Following the gesture, Chiyo Wu noticed something important and fell silent as he spotted 3 mysterious figures approaching through the dark forest. The bandits immediately shifted their attention and surrounded the newcomers. The woman among them observed the situation and assumed they were simply unlucky merchants being robbed. She then asked Jian if they needed any help. Jian, confused by the offer, explained that the attackers were thugs from the Hangzhou underworld and extremely dangerous. Through sound transmission, Chiyo Wu remarked to Jian that the woman and her guards seemed skilled. Jian agreed, noting they appeared to be high-level experts. Chiyo Wu, however, disagreed, saying they were not necessarily high-level, but still strong enough to deal with the thugs easily. Jian added that the real expert was the woman herself and suggested leaving the situation to them. Both of them communicated silently through sound transmission. Jian then addressed the woman directly and requested her assistance. As the bandits moved in, the newcomers prepared for combat. One of the guards asked for instructions, while another reacted irritably to the enemy's killing intent. The woman warned the bandit leader that if they backed down now, no one would be harmed and she would overlook everything so far. The bandit leader, believing the group to be armed bodyguards from a noble family, decided that obtaining the azure pure stone oil was more important than caution. Enraged, he ordered his men to eliminate everyone. Several bandits leapt forward to attack one of the guards, who called them vermin and drew his sword. With a single swift strike, he unleashed a powerful attack that struck all of them at once. The force sent the sheath flying and the bandits were thrown back violently. Moments later, they collapsed, completely defeated. A surviving bandit warned that they were experts and the situation had escalated. The guard calmly sheathed his weapon after finishing the fight. Chiyo Wu, impressed by the display of skill, commented that the man was not bad at all. The bandit leader, humiliated and furious, charged directly at the guards. His attack met the mustache guard's sword, creating a bright clash in the middle of the forest. The mustache guard easily evaded the strike and repositioned himself behind the opponent in a fluid motion. He remarked that the man might have lived if he had accepted the lady's mercy, though he found the situation more interesting this way. The bandit leader continued his assault in rage. The mustache guard calmly evaded while praising his strength. Then, with precise timing, he slipped past another attack and delivered a clean counterstrike. The blade cut through the leader, sending blood spraying as he collapsed lifeless to the ground, ending the battle. Afterward, the first guard questioned why it had taken so long. The mustache guard replied that the opponent had been a restaurant boss. The first guard then asked if he had truly been that strong. The mustache guard revealed that he had a decent amount of momentum, but then pointed behind the first guard, stating that there were prisoners. The first guard intended to eliminate all the bandits, but the woman instructed him to spare those who had surrendered. The mustache guard remarked that it sounded like something their lady would say. With the fight concluded, Jian approached the group and expressed his gratitude for their assistance. The woman responded that it was nothing and that they had simply done what was right in that situation. Jian explained that he should properly introduce himself to his saviors, but that they were currently in a hurry. The woman then told him to proceed ahead, as they would handle the remaining bandits. Jian bowed respectfully in thanks and turned to leave. After walking a few steps, he stopped, turned back, and introduced himself as Sama Jian, stating that if the opportunity ever arose, he would repay this debt of gratitude. Chiyo Wu commented that repaying this debt of gratitude sounded overly dramatic and a bit cringe. Jian immediately told his companion to shut his mouth. The mustache guard muttered that they were a strange pair. The first guard complained that the two had been rude and that, regardless of urgency, they should have cleaned up the mess they caused before leaving. The woman defended them, stating that they had asked for understanding and that she had agreed to their departure. Suddenly, her expression changed as if she had realized something important. Noticing this, the guards asked in alarm what had happened. The woman then explained that the two men had not shown the slightest fear during the entire incident. She repeated the observation, leaving her companions confused. She clarified that even while surrounded by blood and death, they had not flinched once. Their indifference made it seem as though they were merely spectators watching a scene unrelated to them. Some time later, Jian returned to physician Huang Zhang's clinic. He entered a room filled with medicinal supplies while carrying the rare item. Shortly after, physician Huang Zhang rushed into the room and anxiously asked whether he had obtained it. Jian confirmed that he had and carefully began unwrapping the package. The physician expressed regret for not accompanying him, but Jian reassured him not to worry, stating that simply being told how to obtain the azure pure stone oil had been more than enough. Huang Zhang thanked him for understanding and asked about the younger brother who had accompanied him. Jian explained that he had sent him to retrieve his sister, and that he should arrive soon. Huang Zhang reacted slightly awkwardly to this and appeared somewhat uneasy. Noticing the shift in mood, Jian inferred that they might have interrupted some urgent matter concerning the physician. Jian apologized and explained that he had been in a rush because he believed it would be best to begin treatment immediately now that the medicine had been obtained. He added that they would return whenever it was convenient for the physician. The physician replied that Jian had misunderstood him. It was not a matter of lacking time or inconvenience. He explained that there had been another reason he could not accompany them to the Suryong merchant group. Guests from his main family had arrived. Jian was surprised and repeated the physician's words, trying to understand the situation. The physician appeared tense while speaking and covered his mouth with his hand. He then asked whether Jian had ever heard of the medical house of living immortal. Jian was shocked, as it was a medical family reputed to be capable of reviving the dead. He stated that he had not known the physician was connected to the medical house of the living immortal, and added that he had already been impressed when the physician treated his youngest sibling when no one else could, but this revelation was beyond expectation. The physician replied that Jian was flattering him. He clarified that he had not truly treated the patient, but had merely struggled to keep her condition stable. Due to the uniqueness of Jian's sister's condition, he had repeatedly consulted the main family and requested assistance. The main family had shown interest as well, but over the past few years the Central Plains had been devastated by various plagues, leaving them without the manpower to send a doctor. However, as he continued, Jian's expression brightened and he immediately asked whether a doctor from the main family had finally arrived. The physician confirmed that a doctor had indeed come. He explained that the doctor had been traveling to Hangzhou on business and had stopped briefly in Soham. After completing his work, he had agreed to return and examine Jian's sister's condition. He added that the doctor was one of the top figures in the clan, and that compared to him, his own skills were insignificant. Jian immediately stood up and bowed, expressing his gratitude and saying he did not know how he could ever repay such kindness. Huang Zhang responded that it was not kindness but simply his duty as a physician. He added that the doctor had said he would return as quickly as possible after finishing his business, though the exact timing could not be guaranteed. Jian replied that there was no need to worry about timing, and that as long as she could be cured, waiting meant nothing. He said he could wait as many days as necessary. Suddenly, the physician's expression turned serious, and he appeared deeply concerned about something. Jian noticed the change and asked if there was any problem. The physician internally struggled, finding it difficult to give a definitive judgment about the illness, and worried about upsetting Jian's happiness. Because of this, he dismissed the concern and said it was nothing, adding that he would contact them later. Some time later, the family was seen gathered at their country home on a peaceful, sunny day. During the meal, the sister and brother served food, and the atmosphere appeared warm and cheerful. Jian then asked Haiyan where he would be going for his next escort mission. Haiyan replied that his next destination as a warrior would be the city of Wuxi. Jian remarked that it was quite far north from where they currently lived. Haiyan confirmed the distance, but said that if nothing unexpected happened, he would return in 2 weeks. Jian remained silent for a moment, observing his younger brother. Then he finally asked whether Haiyan intended to continue with such a dangerous occupation. Haiyan asked if he should not continue. Jian responded that the job was too dangerous for him, reminding him that he had returned after 12 years and fearing that the same fate might befall his younger brother. Hyan replied that he had started at 17 and had already been doing it for 5 years. He added that there was no guarantee of safety in the future, and if he lived in fear of things that had not yet happened, he would accomplish nothing. He also noted that the treatment and conditions were better compared to other escort bureaus. Jian then revealed that he had saved enough money so he would no longer need to work that job. Hyan questioned this, asking if Jian had not said that he had already spent it all, specifically on Azure Essence. At that moment, Jian suddenly turned to Chiyo Wu with suspicion. Chiyo Wu was startled and let out a nervous chuckle, explaining that he had only been asked too many probing questions. Hyan then spoke up in Chiyo Wu's defense, questioning why Jian was treating him that way and whether he had expected him to hide the truth. He added that even if there was money left, there was nothing specific for him to do with it. Jian suggested purchasing rice paddies and farmland, but Hyan pointed out that none of them knew how to farm. He added that neither of them even remembered much about it, noting that he had only done odd jobs for wages when he was young. Jian then brought up the idea of starting a business, but Hyan dismissed it, saying it would be even more difficult than farming and that without proper talent, it was the easiest way to lose everything. Guangho suddenly spoke up, stating that he voted for business and even offered to secure them a good location if needed. Chiyo Wu questioned what authority he had to do so, sarcastically referencing the Concordant Mind Association. Guangho replied that he might not look impressive, but he did have that level of influence. Chiyo Wu responded skeptically, saying that based on what he had seen before, he doubted it. Hyan then said there was no need to rush, as Jian had only just returned. He added that they also needed to keep an eye on the youngest's treatment. He suggested that if Jian was truly concerned, he could work with him, noting that with Chiyo Wu's size, even the bureau head would eagerly welcome him. Chiyo Wu immediately rejected the idea of being a porter, stating that if he were to work, he would rather be an escort. Jian, however, expressed uncertainty about returning to bureau work. The sister remained silent for a moment before advising them not to make any hasty decisions and to take their time considering their options. Jian agreed, admitting that he had been too rushed. He stated that he would think carefully for now and, in return, wanted them to do the same. He added that he would not force Hyan to quit immediately, but expected him to seriously consider it. Hyan agreed, saying he would think about it seriously as requested. After that, the conversation concluded, and the family decided it was time to eat. Sometimes later, Jian and Chiyo Wu were walking through a bustling city. Chiyo Wu complained repeatedly, saying that finding honest work was extremely difficult, so he suggested taking a break, and Jian agreed. They decided to eat dumplings and walk toward a street food stall. Chiyo Wu ordered 2 plates of meat dumplings and asked if the vendor had any drinks. The vendor apologized and said he did not sell alcohol, so Chiyo Wu simply ordered the food. Seated at a table while waiting, Chiyo Wu asked Jian what they should do, since there did not seem to be any jobs available for them. Jian replied that he was right and that he had already told Hyan the same thing, but after living by the blade his entire life, honest work was not easy to find. Chiyo Wu asked whether Jian truly wanted to try business. Jian replied by asking whether that meant asking Guangho for a favor. Chiyo Wu smiled and said that Jian should allow his family to finally hold their heads high for once. Jian refused, stating that after dealing with Hyan, he intended to pull Guangho out of that gang as well, since it would not be right to rely on favors. He then added that Chiyo Wu did not have the temperament to sit quietly and run a business, joking that they would be lucky if he did not end up hitting customers. Chiyo Wu chuckled and agreed that the assessment was accurate. At that moment, the vendor arrived with their food. The old man served the dumplings, and Chiyo Wu remarked that they should eat before worrying about the future. The dumplings appeared juicy, and one was picked up with chopsticks for the first bite. After tasting it, Chiyo Wu expressed surprise at how good it was. Jian also tried some and agreed, noting that it was far better than the previous day's food and praised the filling. He asked the vendor if it was pork, and the vendor confirmed immediately. Jian reflected on the noticeable difference in taste despite it being the same meat. The vendor proudly stated that no one used meat of such quality. Chiyo Wu suggested they might be using different cuts, but the vendor explained that it was not the cut that mattered, but the butcher's skill. Jian remarked that there must be a specific method for slaughtering pigs, and the vendor clarified that while the method was the same, The skill of the butcher made all the difference. Jian did not fully understand, but Chiyo-Wu suddenly sensed a strong danger approaching. His expression turned serious as he went on alert. In an instant, he struck down a charging pig with a single precise blow to the head, killing it immediately. Chiyo-Wu asked if Jian was unharmed, and Jian thanked him for the assistance. Chiyo-Wu then commented that the sudden appearance of a pig was strange. In the distance, a group of men rushed toward them and the fallen animal. Upon arriving, they asked urgently if Chiyo-Wu was all right. Chiyo-Wu replied that they were fine, but the pig was not as fortunate. He then joked that they would not be asked to compensate for it since it was the men's negligence, leaving them shocked. An old man then appeared and began shouting at the group, calling them incompetent fools and scolding them for repeated failures. The men immediately bowed and apologized. The old man stated that the apology should be directed toward Jian and Chiyo-Wu, not toward him. The group then apologized to both Jian and Chiyo-Wu. Jian stated that it was fine as long as no one was injured. The old man also apologized and explained that the candidates had allowed the pig to escape, then thanked them for their assistance. Hearing the word candidates, Jian showed a curious and slightly surprised expression. The old man explained that he owned a butcher shop and was searching for someone to take over the business after him. Jian connected the information and asked if the old man had been the one who butchered the pig used for the dumplings. The old man confirmed seriously that he was indeed the one responsible. Jian then asked if they could take a look at the butcher shop. The old man was confused and questioned the reason, stating that there was nothing worth seeing since it was not a pleasant sight. Jian replied that such a sight was not commonly found either. Hearing this, the old man looked at the two for a moment as if considering the request. Shortly after, he agreed and allowed them to proceed. They were led to the back of the establishment where the butcher shop was located. There, the old man looked at a pig on the ground while his apprentices observed. He stated that the animal was no longer useful since customers had already been involved in catching it. He then asked the candidates why they believed the butchering process had gone wrong. One apprentice answered that the placement of the pin had been incorrect, and that it should have targeted the exact center of the head. The other added that the hammer striking the pin had slipped. The old man agreed with their observations but revealed that the entire process had been flawed from the beginning. He explained that the most important factor was ensuring the target did not realize it was being killed. The apprentices protested, saying they could not possibly know that since animals could not communicate. The master responded with a sharp, disappointed gaze. Another pig was then brought in and began calmly eating from a wooden bowl. The master instructed everyone to observe carefully. Without alerting the animal, the old man positioned the pin above its head. The apprentices were shocked, insisting it was impossible because the animal had previously panicked even at sight. The master explained that the pig did not react because it had not sensed any killing intent. He further explained that animals were extremely sensitive to such intent. To demonstrate, the old man released a faint killing intent, causing the pig to immediately panic. It drooled in fear and retreated, disturbed by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Chiyo-Wu sensed the intent and was surprised that the old man had both revealed and concealed it so seamlessly. He asked Jian whether the old man was a martial artist, but Jian dismissed the idea, stating that there was no sign of martial arts training, though the man was clearly exceptional. The old man then prepared for the strike and explained that they were only truly ready when they could avoid revealing any killing intent. Everyone watched in shock as he executed the final blow with the pin. He added that the most important aspect was finishing in a single strike so fast that the target did not even realize it was dying. Chiyo-Wu remarked that the animal had been killed without even a scream. Jian agreed, stating that it had been a powerful strike. After the demonstration, the old man shouted at his apprentices, asking what they were doing and reminding them that real work only began after the breath had been cut off. He ordered them to quickly drain the blood from the animal, and they immediately complied. Chiyo-Wu commented that the old man's voice was no joke and that he was extremely strict about his work. Nearby, the butcher shop cleaner overheard this and explained that the old man had no children and was looking for someone to inherit and continue his legacy. Chiyo-Wu did not understand why it was such a serious matter, since it was only the job of slaughtering animals, and asked Jian for his opinion. Jian replied that if it was something someone had devoted their entire life to, they would naturally feel that way. He compared it to Master Bulto, mentioning how many people he had rejected before Chiyo Wu, a well-known story even in the Black Dragon Valley. Chiyo Wu did not fully understand the comparison, but he remembered that his former master also had an exceptionally powerful voice. Jian added that it was not only his voice that stood out, as his physique had also been enormous. He jokingly suggested that the master likely favored Chiyo Wu because their body types were similar. Chiyo Wu smiled and said he had heard that many times before. Suddenly, Jian declared with a determined expression that they would take over the butcher shop. Chiyo Wu was shocked by the decision. Jian explained that they had searched all day but found no place willing to hire them. He added that things would be different if they continued using the sword, but he wanted work they could be proud of in front of their younger siblings. He also noted that hiding their past was already a burden, and Chiyo Wu had nearly exposed it several times. With that decision made, Jian approached the master butcher to discuss employment. He applied for the position, and the old man asked if both of them intended to join. The master scoffed, assuming that after seeing his work, they believed the job was easy. He then apologized to the customers and asked everyone to leave. Jian immediately objected, stating that after witnessing the old man's technique, no one could possibly think the job was easy. He praised the butcher's skill, calling it an art refined through years of experience. Impressed by the compliment, the master butcher asked them to wait and led them to another area. There, the man walked down a wooden ramp while another pig followed closely behind. Soon after, Jian was positioned in front of the animal, prepared for what was to come. The old man challenged him, telling him to demonstrate his ability if he truly wanted to take over the business. Jian admitted he had never done it before but said he was willing to try. He then knelt down and prepared for the strike while the pig calmly ate from its bowl. With a single precise blow, the animal was struck, and its blood splattered across the wooden ceiling. The master butcher stumbled backward, completely stunned by what he had just witnessed. Wide-eyed, the old man stated that what had taken him a lifetime to learn had been executed effortlessly by the young man. Still in disbelief, he asked again whether Jian had truly never been taught before. Jian calmly replied that he had simply followed what the old man had demonstrated moments earlier. Jian then shouted at Chiyo Wu, ordering him to hurry and hang the animal for the next step. Chiyo Wu grumbled in annoyance at the shouting, but still moved to assist with the task. The master butcher was shocked to see the ease with which he lifted the pig, noting that it normally required 3 or 4 grown men to handle it. Chiyo Wu prepared to hang the animal and asked if he truly needed tools for the job. The old man was confused by the question and asked what he meant. Chiyo Wu proceeded to hang the dead pig using the chains and then walked toward a wooden gate, leaving the others behind. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from outside the butcher shop. The master butcher rushed toward the sound, with Jian following closely behind. Outside, Chiyo Wu had already killed a pig with a single punch. He excitedly stated that, in the end, they only needed to finish the butchering. The old man was left speechless by the display of overwhelming strength and finally understood the situation. He asked whether they were martial artists, and Jian confirmed that they had once been. The old man could not understand why martial artists would choose such physically demanding labor. Jian then explained with a serious expression that they simply wanted to live ordinary lives. The master replied that with their abilities, they could pursue other work, but Jian stated that it had not been easy for them. After hearing this, the old man realized that the 2 young men had lived far from peaceful lives. He sighed and decided to accept them as apprentices in the butcher shop. He remarked that it was unfortunate he did not have much time left, and Jian asked him to teach them properly. Jian confidently assured him that the master would not regret his decision. Some time later, the scene shifted to a cat resting peacefully on the roof of a house. Inside, a calligraphy brush moved rapidly as an important message was being written. A man named Yango Jung reacted in shock upon hearing the name of the Healing Sun Medical House. His servant, Dang Beck, reported that a member of the imperial family who had retired to Hangzhou had fallen gravely ill, and that the imperial court had personally requested assistance from the Healing Sun Medical House. Yango Jung responded that the physicians of the Healing Sun Medical House who were heading to Hangzhou had clashed with the Gaidong, finding the situation strange and questioning why they would act so violently without reason. Dang Beck replied that the Gaidong had been pursuing the Azure Pure Stone Oil. Upon hearing this, Yango Jung became even more furious, complaining that such a valuable item had been wasted on treating a declining member of royalty. However, Dang Baek corrected him, stating that it had not been used for the royals' treatment. He explained that the owner of the azure pure stone oil was someone else, and that there was still a chance to obtain it. Yang Do-young poured himself a drink and asked whether the owner was someone else, questioning if it was not the property of the Healing Sun Medical House. Dang Baek replied that it was indeed someone else, explaining that the Gaedong had originally been chasing that person when they clashed with the Healing Sun Medical House. Yang Do-young stated that he should have said so earlier, then demanded to know who it was and who possessed the azure pure stone well. Dang Baek replied that it was a man named Sama Jian from Shaoxing, who had purchased the azure pure stone oil that the leader of the Water Dragon Merchant Union had been secretly keeping in order to treat his younger sister. Yang Do-young revealed a mocking smile and commented that he had not expected the greedy old leader of the Water Dragon Merchant Union to have obtained the azure pure stone oil. He then considered it an opportunity beyond measure, noting that if it was truly the azure pure stone oil, it could cure the illness of the young member most valued by the Yongo clan. He immediately ordered his subordinate to use any means necessary to obtain it. He further instructed that if the oil had already been used, they should capture the sister who had consumed it, as she would not have fully absorbed its effects yet, and the medicinal power would still remain in her blood. Meanwhile, at the butcher shop, Jian was seen cutting meat with precise and skilled movements under the master butcher's watchful eye. The old man laughed and praised his ability, stating that the young man's skill was remarkable to observe. He also commended Jian's rapid learning and said there was nothing more he could teach him. Jian humbly thanked him, attributing his progress to the master's guidance. The old man responded that he was the one who should be grateful, as he had hoped the butcher shop would maintain its reputation. He added that if it failed to do so, it would be better for it to disappear entirely. His hand trembled slightly, revealing his emotional state, and he thanked Jian for fulfilling his wish, stating that he could now depart in peace. Jian replied that he was the one who should be grateful, as he could finally settle down. Suddenly, Chiu Wu appeared, complaining that they could have simply cut the meat casually and sold it. He then threw meat into a barrel and questioned whether Jian truly needed to learn such detailed techniques. The old man told Jian not to give Chiu Wu a knife and to assign him only heavy labor, noting that his skill in slaughtering cows and pigs was adequate enough for that role. Chiu Wu smiled smugly and said that the old man had finally made a sensible decision. Afterward, the three of them took a break while Jian poured drinks for everyone. Chiu Wu agreed to follow the master's instruction and admitted that he did not have a talent for handling knives. Jian calmly took a sip and told him to do as he wished. Chiu Wu thanked him and then offered a drink to the master butcher as well. However, Jian struck his arm and shouted that it was completely inappropriate. Chiu Wu did not understand why and argued that it was only a single drink since the old man was nearing the end of his life. The master butcher then perked up and stated that even if he were to die at that moment, he could not refuse a drink on such a day. At the old man's excitement, Jian showed a shocked and speechless expression. Some time later, Haiyan returned from his escort mission and looked at the new butcher shop, thinking that they had truly started something new. Suddenly, his sister appeared while sweeping the place and excitedly asked when he had arrived. Haiyan immediately stepped forward and took the broom from her, telling her that her body was weak and she should not be doing such work. The young woman replied that it was nothing much, then added that Jian had taken over the butcher shop. Haiyan said he had already heard on the way. She replied that since Jian had worked so hard to obtain the butcher shop, it should not be left dirty. Haiyan told her to stop. He then placed his bag on the table and asked whether the business at the new butcher shop was going well. She replied that it was not yet, explaining that only a few days had passed since the previous owner's death and the official opening, so it would be unreasonable to expect immediate success. Haiyan then asked about the old owner passing away. She explained that he had passed peacefully on the night Jian took over the butcher shop. At that moment, Jian entered the room carrying a tray. Noticing Haiyan, he asked when he had arrived and said he had been worried because the escort mission had taken so long. Haiyan replied that he had just returned and was fine, but added that Jian had truly caused an incident. He also said the escort mission had not been long at all and had ended quickly. Jian responded that it had turned out that way and asked if Haiyan disliked it. Haiyan said he did not dislike it, but was simply surprised. He had never imagined Jian would take over a butcher shop. He then asked whether it would truly be alright, noting that it was a famous establishment, and that the former owner was highly skilled. He warned that even a slight drop in skill would lead to constant criticism, and that even doing well would only barely break even. Jian reassured him not to worry, stating that he had confidence, and that if they were to make a living, all of them would need to work hard. Suddenly, Guangho appeared in the distance, shouting desperately for his siblings. Jian stopped what he was doing and asked what was happening outside. The youngest rushed in and shouted that they had finally arrived. Chiu Wu lost patience, grabbed him by the ear, and demanded that he stop talking nonsense and explain properly. Guangho shouted for him to let go and complained about the violence. Chiu Wu released him and laughed, saying it was a sign of affection, then added that he had never seen real violence, and offered to demonstrate it. Guangho rubbed his ear and declined, saying he had heard the same thing before. He then turned to Jian and revealed that a messenger from the clinic had arrived. Everyone reacted in surprise. Guangho explained that the doctor who had gone to Hangzhou had returned and instructed them to bring the sister immediately. Without hesitation, Jian removed his apron and said they should leave at once. Some time later, they arrived at the clinic, where a large wooden sign stood at the entrance. Inside, Dr. Huang Zhong greeted them and said he had been waiting for their arrival. Jian politely replied that they had rushed over as soon as they received the news and wondered if they had come too quickly. Huang Zhong stated that it was no problem, as the doctor from the main family wanted to see the patient as soon as possible. He then introduced a woman named Huang Yang, who had come to assist with the treatment. Upon seeing her face, Jian was completely shocked and left speechless. Huang Yang greeted him with a faint smile and remarked that their meeting was quite a coincidence. Behind her stood the two guards who had previously helped them during the fight with bandits in the dark forest. The mustache guard commented that he now understood why the Heaven-slaying faction had pursued them so fiercely. Noticing their reactions, Huang Zhong asked whether they already knew each other. Jian explained that they had been attacked while obtaining the azure pure stone oil, and that she had assisted them in the forest. The doctor laughed, and remarked that the connection between them was quite unusual. Jian then said that he regretted leaving so quickly without properly expressing his gratitude, and once again thanked her for her help at that time. Huang Yang replied that there was no need, explaining that since he had been urgently trying to obtain the notoriously rare azure pure stone oil for his sick sister, he must have been pressed for time. Jian then introduced Gina, stating that she would be the one undergoing examination. Gina introduced herself and said she looked forward to the treatment. Huang Yang responded warmly, calling her as beautiful as a celestial maiden and adding that she should be the one requesting cooperation. She then explained that illness could not be cured by a physician alone, and that only when both patient and physician worked together could a disease be overcome. Gina nodded in agreement, and Huang Yang smiled in satisfaction at her response. She then asked everyone to leave the room so she could examine her alone. Some time later, about half an hour passed while the others waited anxiously outside. Chiu Wu complained about the long wait, while Jian remained silent, watching the door. Finally, the door opened and Huang Yang stepped out. Jian immediately rushed forward and anxiously asked about his sister's condition. With a serious expression, Huang Yang revealed that she had identified the illness. She explained that Gina had been born with heavenly Yin divine veins. Huang Zhong, confused, asked whether it was heavenly Yin divine veins and not the 9 Yin severed meridians. Huang Yang explained that while they were similar, they were different conditions. She added that just before leaving the main family, she had encountered a patient with the same symptoms. At first, she had mistaken it for the 9 Yin severed meridians and attempted treatment, but something had felt wrong. She had noticed a subtle difference, and only after discovering records of the heavenly Yin divine veins in the main family archives was she able to correctly identify the condition. Chiu Wu then asked whether it could be cured. Huang Yang replied that she could not give a definite answer. She explained that the previous patient had already missed the proper timing for treatment. However, according to the records, the main family's acupuncture techniques did have an effect on the heavenly Yin divine veins. Chiu Wu then asked what had happened to the patient mentioned in the records and whether they had survived. At that question, the doctor fell silent and looked away, indicating that the answer was not a good one. Genius protagonists, overwhelming growth, and legendary battles, This is your battlefield. We're just steps away from 20,000 subscribers. Subscribe now and rise with us.